How did four dudes from Canada become the biggest modern rock act in the world? I'm talking, of course, about Nickelback. So what if a handful of principles could reveal the marketing secrets that has led to such massive success for Nickelback and how you could start to implement that for your career? Well, stay locked in because in this video, I am going to be breaking down the marketing genius of Nickelback. Now, what I want to establish, first of all, if we're going to understand how a band became literally the #1 modern rock act in the world, and that's not me joking around. The only act that is their peers that comes close in terms of monthly listeners is Evanescence. Everybody else that's above them is like Queen, AC/DC, Guns N' Roses, like legacy bands, right? So we've got to go all the way back to the beginning if we really want to understand how they got to where they are today. So the first thing, the first principle that we really need to understand if we want to understand how Nickelback got to where they are is ruthless persistence. So let me define that a little bit. Back in the early days, Nickelback were a bunch of road dogs. They were hitting the road as often as they possibly could, playing as many shows locally and abroad in Canada that they could possibly play. Now, there's a problem though. A lot of people that are young bucks maybe won't understand this as much, but some of you existing veterans in the music business will understand that before social media, pretty much every marketing effort that you could possibly take for your music career required money, right? It was a pretty expensive thing to do. You had to fund a van, you had to go travel around, you had to feed yourselves, right? And so Nickelback had pretty much done every side hustle they could imagine. At one point, Chad Kroeger was actually selling fish out of the back of his truck door to door. Can you imagine a tougher gig than selling door to door? And then on top of it, it's like, yeah, now you're selling frozen fish out of the back of a trunk. Like, good Lord, right? But that was the kind of persistence that Chad and the rest of the band members had because they were going to make this thing work. In fact, they had actually gotten loans from their family who were supportive of this venture when they started to see that they needed more capital, they needed more money, that they didn't have selling fish out of the back of out of trunks, as you can imagine, right? And so they were indebted to family that they loved and that loved them, and they just decided, like, we have to make this work. Like, if not, these people are going to be out of money and we're going to be screwed and paying this back until the day we die. Like, there is no plan B. There is only succeed, right? And so you have to understand that that mentality, first of all, as a bedrock for your music business, is absolutely necessary. Like, I mean, think about the level of commitment it takes to go 6 figures in debt into people that you love in the pursuit of this dream that you believe in. Now, I'm not recommending that everyone go get 6 figures in debt. I've watched Financial Audit. People don't need to be doing that. But here's what I'm saying. The mentality, the persistence, the tenacity, that is something that a lot of people are missing when it comes to their music career, is this ruthless persistence to where it's like, it doesn't matter what the obstacles are, I'm going to find a way to make it happen. And so what happened is, for the first few years of Nickelback's career, they were road dogs, right? They were in this sort of post-grunge musical style, so very grunge influenced. And they had got decent success from that, right? And they had sort of built their brand up as this blue-collar, hard-working, touring road dog rock band, right? And so something started to shift, though, because they had released a couple of albums and they did okay. They had some good singles, right? But then nothing really came of it until something shifted, okay? Chad was mentioning in an interview one time that he had a lot of people that would come up to him and say, wow, your lyrics are really interesting. What's the song about? What's the song about? And that was a question that he was getting all the time. Can you imagine if you were playing, 100+ shows a year and people kept asking you that question? It would get quite irritating. So he was deciding, like, okay, I'm not going to shroud everything in metaphor anymore, right? It's not like metaphors are off limits, but it's like a lot of what artists do is they don't want to say what they really want to say in their lyrics, and so they hide what they want to say in metaphor because it's a layer of protection from us being vulnerable and like sharing what we really want to say in a concise manner in front of the world. Because guess what? If someone critiques your metaphors, well, then maybe that's just their interpretation of it. Maybe that's not what the artist meant. Maybe there's some distance there, right? However, when you just tell people exactly how you feel concisely in your lyrics, when people judge that, it feels more like they're judging you, right? So a lot of songwriters would avoid this vulnerability. and directness, and especially in rock and metal, we're known for our metaphorical obsession. We'll just flip through the sources in our spare time. And the problem, though, is it creates a level of disconnect, right? We don't want people working any harder than they have to be able to connect with us. Some people may like a song and want to connect, but your lyrics just made them work so hard to figure out what the heck was going on that they tuned out. Yes, there are a lot of people that maybe don't care, especially in the more hardcore metal side of the world. The lyrics and stuff can become secondary and almost not important. But for the majority of people, because we have to think about the mass of people, and by the way, the masses are not dumb, right? Let me put it this way. It takes more intelligence to distill the meaning of your song in simple terms that are also clever than it is just to shroud everything in metaphor and be clever. Listen, we've all got Rhyme Zone on our phone. It's not very hard to find a rhyme for fun little phrases that we come up with, like discern verity. Okay? Sounds kind of cool. Sounds like I'm intelligent. Maybe I know what I'm talking about, but no one really knows what I'm talking about, and it comes off more as posturing, right? Like, I'm guilty, by the way. I'm not saying I haven't done this. I'm just saying we've all got Rhyme Zone on our phone. So it's very easy to be clever, right? In the terms of like, look at how I rhymed this word with this word and the metaphors and this kind of thing. It's a lot more difficult to condense the meaning of a song in a simplified way so that the first person that hears it on the first listen gets what the song is about, connects with it instantly, and wants to listen to it over and over and over again. Now, a lot of that is also the music behind the words, right? But what I'm talking about is this big issue that a lot of songwriters will have, especially the up-and-comers, where they get afraid to share their real vulnerabilities about how they feel about things and how they want to phrase them in a song. And so they create metaphors, and then they say things like, well, I want people to come up with their own meaning, right? You know, and they say these, which is fine if that is really what your pursuit is for music. But when we're talking about like growing your band to the level of a Nickelback, you know, status, right? You've got to be able to connect with masses of people. So if you have a goal to connect with millions and millions and millions of people, you got to make sure that your songwriting, the meaning is apparent. It doesn't have to be quote unquote dumbed down. It just has to be simplified. Albert Einstein, I think it was, said that if you can't explain something, you know, to like a fourth grader, then you really don't understand the topic. I think that was Albert Einstein. I could be wrong. Fact check me on that. But the idea of the quote is absolutely true, which is if you can't explain something complicated in a simple manner, then you really don't understand it, right? But we don't look at that with our songwriting sometimes. We think like, no, the more clever I am and the more like unsimple I can make it, the better it is. Because then the harder they have to work to know what I really meant. And then once they finally do all the work to uncover the eighth meta meaning that I've baked into my lyrics, you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm not saying you can't do fun things like that. But what I'm saying is if you really want to connect with people, I would take Chad Kroeger's advice and I would start making the meaning a little bit more on the sleeve, right? Yeah, you're going to open yourself up to criticism, but you will now have a better vehicle of connection. You know, your song is supposed to connect with people and change their hearts and give them some emotions and, you know, help them cope with things. If we're so, you know, I don't want to say stuck up, but we're like stuck in our, like, no, I've got to impress people. I've got to look like I'm intelligent because I used a fancy word, right? You know, we can't do that. It's not going to work. So what did Nickelback do? They shifted their songwriting to be way more on the surface. And they started writing in lots of different genres and playing around with these kinds of things. They weren't afraid to have fun. That is something that a lot of up-and-comers will get stuck in, where they're afraid for their music to be fun. Now, I'm not saying you have to be fun all the time, just like I'm saying you shouldn't be serious all the time, right? I think when we all got into music, we either wrote a song and it was fun to do, or we wrote kind of a non-serious fun tune just because it was something you could do being a musician, right? A lot of us lose that sense of fun when it comes to our music business because we're stuck up in the music business. We're stuck in the systems going, okay, I got to work on content. I got to do all these things. And we don't come at it from the lens of fun. Well, especially in your songwriting, you want to have this level of playfulness in your lyrics where you're not afraid to be a little cheeky And if you listen to some of, Nickelback songs, Chad would write some very cheeky lyrics, listen to their more sexually suggestive songs. It's on the nose, right? And in some ways it's kind of, oh, I can see why he did that for the story of the song. And then at other times it's like, oh, he's just like trying to be fun and try to play with us, right? But like the whole point there is that whole sex, drugs, and rock and roll thing, they weren't afraid of it. So as their brand, they were this blue collar band that wasn't afraid to express how they really felt about like big life questions or romantic situations. And they lent themselves to that whole sex, drugs, and rock and roll cliche, but they did it in a modern way, right? So that really leads me to the sort of final point here, which is you have to lean in, right? Like, don't be so afraid of critics. Nickelback, we can't talk about Nickelback without talking about critics, unfortunately, but actually, you know what? I hate to say this, if anybody from Nickelback ends up watching this, it's like, thank you for your sacrifice to teach us this lesson, which is that the critics don't know really what the hell they're talking about. And this is what I mean. Look at the example that happened with Nickelback in the Detroit, I think it was a Thanksgiving football game with the NFL. There was a petition that went viral, like, stop Nickelback from playing. And this misconception from the media, this narrative came out that, like, the people of Detroit didn't want Nickelback to play. But it actually was a petition started from someone who didn't even live in Detroit. And then most of the people who signed the petition didn't live in Detroit because it was just something you could fill out online. And when something goes viral like that, then, like, someone in Yugoslavia is like, don't have Nickelback play it. You know what I mean? So, I think it was Chad and Ryan came out in an interview and said, one of our top selling cities of tickets that tour and tours after were Detroit. And that's actually a really interesting lesson there, which is sometimes the critics think that they're hurting you because they're trying to hurt you. But what they don't understand is they've actually directed attention towards you. See, what people don't understand is you're a musician, not a politician. You don't have an undecided middle, right? You have people that are going to become curious and dive in. Now, some people may say there is an undecided middle and that the media companies influence some of those people, but those people were never going to be fans to begin with. If there is actually an undecided person who's like, I don't really know, they're going to go look into it, right? And so what a lot of people think is that, like, oh no, if the press wrote something negative about me, that would just be like the worst thing in the world because now I have all this negative attention and people would be in my comment section. My comments would be 100 to 1 negative. Does that mean reality is going to be like that? Look at Nickelback. They had, thousands of people fill out this petition, but guess what? They also had thousands more people pay tickets to go see them live. You see what I'm saying? Like, and what does it hurt to get some negative publicity? Yeah, I mean, I've had people in my comments tell me that, like, I'm the Antichrist because I teach musicians who are artists about the business. People just hate me sometimes. But I don't let that stop me from saying what I'm going to say and teaching what I'm going to teach. Just like Nickelback didn't let the hate from Rolling Stone or whoever prevent them from doing what they wanted to do. Think about it. I mentioned this earlier a little bit. There are no other rock bands that are from that era that Nickelback came out of that are at the same level of monthly listeners. Evanescence is the closest one because they had that big breakout song, actually two of them. But and that's not a knock at Evanescence, by the way. I do really enjoy a lot of their music. But the whole point here is you have to be able to play with cliches despite what critics are going to say. And you have to have fun with it. Like, I understand that there's you have to understand the business side. And to touch into that, Mike Kruger is the brother of Chad, right? He's the bass player. And he's like the business-oriented person of the band. He's the one who's going through the finances and looking at we could save costs here and do this sort of thing, right? So there's always this kind of dynamic play here. So that's another lesson to take into consideration, is that it's not all fun and play. You do have to have a business mind for what you're doing, right? And with the combination of Chad and Mike Kruger, and the other members of the band are obviously essential to the songwriting process and the live performing and all that great stuff. But you have to look at it from this perspective when it comes to marketing, right? You had this band that came out of a very road dog, blue collar, kind of work ethic and sort of had that label to them, right? But their music was kind of labeled as like mysterious, metaphorical, that kind of thing. And so everyone was asking, what's your stuff about? And they only got a certain amount of success because they were only really able to connect with a certain amount of people with that sort of songwriting approach. So Chad was like, I'm going to have it to where people stop asking me this question all the time. Made a shift in their songwriting, started writing about bigger issues in life, but being very on the nose about it in a clever way. It's a very hard thing to pull off. And Chad, if you really study his lyrics from a songwriter perspective and you don't let the cheekiness affect you, he's really a great lyricist if you dive into it. And he has fun with lyrics. And I think that's something that a lot of people miss in their songwriting, is they miss this element of like, let me touch on something, but I'm going to just be on the nose with how I feel about it. You know, those songs are the ones that connect, because that's where people are like, oh, this song is like saying all the things I could never put into words, or I could never say out loud, and all these sort of things, right? So the songwriting started to shift, and then they leaned into that blue collar brand, but not just from like, oh, we're blue collar working guys. They kind of lent more into that sex, drugs, and rock and roll appeal, right? It was just the aesthetics that were blue collar. Now the actual brand itself had become a little bit more rock and roll in that traditional sense, that 80s sense. But then the critics came in. And so the mixture of that, you kind of got this, the fact they leaned in and didn't cower to the critics and change their style and all that stuff, they sort of became bad boys. The bad boys of the industry. That's a good place to be in. You're getting a lot of attention. And guess what? 24 million monthly listeners later, I think they have the last laugh. Just saying. And so I think it's a nice mixture of like, once they leaned in and understood like, oh, a lot of this hate is superficial. You know, it still sucks, I'm sure, especially when it's at that volume. But when you show up to the shows and there's still thousands of people there that are there to see you, you can kind of have confidence as a musician that you can lean into that hate. You can lean into the critics a little bit, because by doing that, by being polar, creating polarity, and I'm not saying like, your people are going to talk about you. By doing that, you're going to find your tribe. And sure, you'll find the people, like marketing is just as much about attraction as it is repulsion. People think marketing is about attracting everybody. Not necessarily. Marketing is about attracting the right fit and repulsing the wrong fit. So the people that couldn't take any of the cheeky lyrics, or don't like it when they go heavy, or don't like it when they go too soft, those people get weeded out. Right? And then they just stick to their guns, and the people who are into that kind of thing, they stick around. And they accumulate more of them and more of them. And they let the ones who want to filter out because of negative press filter out, and then they're replaced by new people. And so you get the idea is that you never want to limit yourself to press. Like if the press determined how you were going to approach your music business, I mean, they would pull you every which direction. You want to be like Nickelback, where you just kind of truck on with your, this is what I do. This is what I do. And if you don't like it, it's like that Eddie Murphy. If you don't like it, you can get the F out. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's how a lot of us should be about how we write music. And when it comes down to it, though, that's for the haters. It's a very nice balance of like, when it comes to my audience, I seek better connection with my audience, but I'm not necessarily looking for understanding from my critics, right? I do, in a sense, want approval from my tribe, but I'm not looking for approval from the tabloids. You see what I'm saying? Like, that's to me one of the core lessons of Nickelback, and the genius of their marketing is that they wrote songs that connected better. They lent into that personality, and they didn't change for anybody, right? It wasn't about caving to critics. It was about catering to your community, okay? So hopefully this video has given you some principles that you can implement. Sure, there are some things about Nickelback's journey that not every independent DIY musician can implement. But these, in my opinion, are the principles that every single one of us can use inside of our music business to get some progress, to grow, and to get better. Because Nickelback, though it was a lot of hard work, they also understood the business, right? Hence, Mike Kruger being the business mind of that. And so if you'd like to understand a little bit more about the business side of the music industry, then I recommend hopping on a one-on-one call with me. Click the link that's in the description, or you can check out our website. There's tons of great resources for independent DIY artists who are trying to understand the music business better. And yeah, check out those resources, and I look forward to seeing you on another video inside of Musicians Ignite. Take care.